They thought I was nobody, just a quiet old man with a patch of dirt and a rusted gate. So they parked their heavy trucks on my land again and again, without asking, without shame. They crushed my grass-spilled oil into my soil and laughed when I told them to stop. But what they didn't know is that I was watching, documenting, waiting. And when they loaded my field for their big project, I sealed the gate shut and walked away. They screamed, called the police, threatened lawsuits, but it was too late. This wasn't just about land anymore. This was about drawing a line and daring them to cross it. It began on a Tuesday morning that carried the sweet scent of freshly cut grass, mingled with the sharp bite of diesel exhaust. I just poured my second cup of coffee and stepped out onto the wide porch of the old family home. When I spotted it, a massive flatbed, rig its side panels boldly stenciled HOA Contractor, nosing its way across the lower pasture, as though the land had been waiting for it all these years. The heavy tires sank a few inches into the damp soil, hesitated a moment, then settled squarely beneath the sprawling branches of my favorite pecan tree. The engine kept rumbling low and arrogant. No knock on my door, no glance toward the house. Nothing. My name is James Corbin, and I live on the edge of Willow Ridge Estates. My 5-acre parcel sits just outside the subdivision's official boundaries, a quiet holdout from a time long before cul-de-sacs and vinyl siding took over the hills. This house, these fields, these trees, they were my grandfather's first, then my father's, and now mine. I've kept the fences mended, the taxes paid, and my nose clean. When the Homeowners Association formed a decade ago, they sent me a polite letter inviting me to join voluntarily. I declined courteously, repeatedly, and legally. My land was never part of their jurisdiction. Still, its proximity made it a constant irritation to them, or perhaps a temptation. That first morning, I didn't charge down the hill in a rage. I figured it might be an honest mistake. I walked across the dew-slick grass boots, leaving dark prints, and tapped on the driver's window. "Morning," I said, keeping my tone neighborly. "You realize this is private property." The driver barely glanced up from his phone. He gave a lazy shrug. "Dispatch told me to stage here. Board approved it." "The board doesn't own this ground," I replied. "I do. I'd appreciate it if you'd move along." He muttered something about checking with his supervisor, but after a long sigh, he fired the engine back up, reversed out, and rumbled away. I watched the crushed blades of grass try to rise again behind him, their tips blackened from a slow drip of oil. That patch would carry the scar for years. The next dawn brought another rig. By the end of the week, it had become routine. Heavy flatbeds, dump trucks, utility vans, each one rolling in at first light and claiming a slice of my pasture, like it was a public lot. Most left by dusk, but a few lingered overnight, their headlights cutting across my bedroom windows long after midnight. Every gouge in the earth, every dark puddle of spilled fuel, every discarded energy drink can mark not just the soil, but something deeper inside me. Whenever I approached a driver, the answer was always the same. Lazy refrain, the board said it was fine. By Friday, I'd had enough of the polite approach. I called the HOA office. A young voice answered, sounding half asleep despite the early hour. I explained the situation, unauthorized vehicles using my land as a parking lot. "Oh, you're the gentleman on Magnolia Hill, right?" she said as if I were a minor footnote in their files. "We were told that area was unclaimed common space." Unclaimed. My voice stayed level, but the word landed hard. "It's taxed in my name, fenced, deeded, and I mow it myself every week." Okay, she drawled. "I'll pass the message along to the board." That weekend, the HOA hosted a community cleanup day. Chainsaws buzzed, volunteers in matching polo shirts swarmed the neighborhood edges, and contractors hauled in wood chippers, dumpsters, and stacks of mulch. They chose my lower field as their central staging area. I stood on the porch with my coffee going cold, watching them transform my pasture into a construction yard. By Sunday evening, the place looked like a battlefield after retreat. Trash had blown into the ditches, deep furrows scarred the ground, and a caustic chemical smell hung over one corner where something had spilled and soaked in. A folding table still stood in the middle of the mess, a hand-lettered sign flapping from it, "HOA Check-In." That night, under a thin moon, I walked the field with my phone. I photographed every scar, fuel slicks gleaming like black mirrors, torn sod, abandoned gloves, the banner still snapping in the breeze. I recorded the low hum of a generator they'd forgotten to shut off. Then I emailed the entire collection to the association's official address with a short, unambiguous message. "This is private property. You are trespassing. Cease immediately." The reply arrived the next morning from Clarissa, vice president of the HOA. It was polished, professional, and utterly tone-deaf. "Thank you for generously providing the space. We apologize for any confusion. The board believed your lot functioned as an extension of the common area due to its location. We will strive to minimize future impact. No remorse, no promise to stop, no offer to repair the damage already done." I sat at the kitchen table a long time staring at the screen. Outside, the pecan tree cast its familiar shadow across the wounded ground. Something inside me, quiet until then, shifted and hardened. They had mistaken silence for surrender. They were about to learn how wrong that assumption was. The morning after Clarissa's email, I drove into town with a fire simmering behind my ribs. At City Hall, I pulled every public record I could find, the original plat map from 1953 survey, stakes tax receipts going back decades. I made 5 certified copies stamped and sealed. One went straight into an envelope addressed to the HOA's registered office. The rest I filed away in a folder that was growing thicker by the day. Back home, I installed a motion-activated trail camera high in the branches of an oak that overlooked the main approach to the pasture. It was discreet, olive drab housing, no infrared glow at night, and it fed directly to an app on my phone. The very next dawn, it earned its keep. 2 heavy rigs crept in before the sun cleared the hills, parked side by side beneath the pecans, and unloaded toolboxes as casually as if they were setting up in their own driveway. No permits taped to windshields, no courtesy wave toward the house. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table under the low glow of a single lamp, spreading out the plat map, the deed, the new photographs. Anger was there, hot and familiar from younger days, but I kept it leashed. I'd learned long ago that rage without direction burns the hand that holds it. What gnawed at me, deeper than fury, was the sheer certainty in their behavior, the way they moved across my ground, as though my absence from their meetings, my refusal to pay their fees, had somehow erased my name from the title. They were wrong. A week later, the skies opened. Not a polite spring shower, but a hard-driving Texas deluge that rolled in with purple thunderheads and sheets of rain that hammered the tin roof like buckshot. I stood in the mudroom watching water cascade off the eaves and thought, good. Maybe this will keep them away for a day or two. I should have known better. When the storm finally broke on Thursday morning, the air hung heavy with petrichor and the faint metallic tang of ozone. I carried my coffee onto the porch and froze. 3 massive flatbeds sat deeper in the field than ever before, half buried in fresh mud, their cabs still dripping. They must have driven in at the height of the downpour, headlights cutting through curtains of rain tires, churning the soft earth into deep, ugly scars. I walked down through the muck boots, sucking free with every step. The pasture looked ravaged. Sod had been peeled back in long strips, exposing raw clay beneath. Standing pools shimmered with rainbow swirls of hydraulic fluid and diesel. One driver glanced up from his newspaper, caught my eye, and offered a lazy 2-finger salute off his hard hat, as if we were old pals sharing a joke. I didn't bother speaking this time. Words had proven useless. That evening, I measured the deepest gouges with a steel tape 10 inches 12 in places. I photographed the shattered sprinkler heads, the patches of once lush Bermuda, now reduced to bare dirt. I documented everything with dates and timestamps. Then I drafted another email, shorter and colder than the last. Cease and desist. You are causing documented material damage to private property. Attachments, 23 high-resolution images and a marked-up satellite overlay showing exact property lines. Clarissa's reply arrived within the hour, polished to a corporate sheen. We appreciate your feedback and are coordinating with contractors to optimize logistics. Given the adjacency of your parcel to Willow Ridge common areas, limited temporary staging may be required. Thank you for your continued understanding. Continued understanding. I read the phrase 3 times, feeling it settle in my gut like a stone. Later, alone in the quiet house, I pulled up the trail cam recordings. At 4:13 a.m., 2 rigs rolled in, headlights doused to avoid notice. At 5:45, a third followed. At 6:10, a man in a reflective vest clipboard clutched like a battle standard strode the field pointing out parking spots beneath my trees as though directing traffic in a mall lot. I saved every frame. The following morning, I drove to the county clerk's office and sat across from Melinda Hayes, an old friend who'd spent 20 years sharpening her instincts on public records. I slid the folder across her desk. HOA contractors are treating my pasture like their personal equipment yard, I said. I've warned them. They keep coming. She flipped through the prints, tire scars, fuel slicks, time-stamped stills of vehicles crossing the boundary stake. Her eyebrows rose a fraction. You've got certified plats, 5 copies, video evidence, 3 cameras now all date-stamped. Any chemical spills. I tapped a photo of iridescent runoff. That's sitting 20 yards uphill from an aquifer recharge zone. Melinda leaned back, folding her arms. James, you've got more than a grievance. You've got a textbook case. With her guidance, I drafted a formal notarized notice of trespass and property damage citing the relevant Texas statutes, chapter and verse. I sent it certified mail return receipt requested to the HOA's legal address. Then I went home and waited. Days turned into another week. The rigs kept coming bolder now, parking farther in closer to the wildflower meadow my daughter and I had seeded years ago. The ground compacted under their weight until it felt like walking on asphalt. Water pooled where it never had before. My irrigation lines began to fail in the low spots they'd created. But the hardest blow wasn't the machinery or the mud. It was the grass. That pasture had been my father's pride. After he passed, I'd reseeded every inch myself, rolling out sod under a blistering August sun, watering it by hand until it took. My daughter had learned to ride her bike there, training wheels clattering over the gentle slope. We'd flown kites, hunted for arrowheads, built blanket forts beneath those same pecans. The soil held memories the way tree rings hold years. Now it lay flattened, poisoned, scarred. One quiet Sunday, I walked the entire lower field with a notebook and calculator mapping every damaged acre, estimating repair costs, topsoil aeration, reseeding irrigation fixes. The tally climbed past $8,000 before I stopped counting the intangibles. I drafted one more notice, this one titled, Intent to Pursue Civil Remedy, and delivered it by every channel I could email, certified mail hand-delivered to the HOA office, where a startled intern accepted it with wide eyes. Then I went home, stood in the middle of the ruined meadow, and made a promise to the land itself. No more asking. No more waiting for permission to defend what was already mine. If they insisted on using my pasture as their staging ground, they were going to learn what it felt like to be the ones who couldn't leave. Monday morning broke with the familiar low growl of diesel engines vibrating through the floorboards. I didn't need to look out the window to know they were back. The sound had become a grim alarm clock, pulling me from sleep with the same reliability as the sunrise. But this time I was prepared. I gathered the thick folder I'd spent the weekend assembling, certified plat maps. The notarized trespass notice damage, estimates broken down by line item, and printed stills from the trail cameras. I tucked it under my arm and walked down the gravel path toward the pasture, the air still cool and heavy with leftover dew. 3 contractors lounged against their rigs, sipping from oversized thermoses and trading laughs that carried across the scarred ground. The man with the ever-present clipboard, the one who seemed to fancy himself the site foreman, turned as I approached. "Morning," I said, voice steady. "You're on private property again." He sized me up, then glanced at the folder as if it were a prop in a bad play. A smirk tugged at his mouth. "Look, buddy," he drawled. "The HOA cleared this spot for staging. It's temporary. Relax." I opened the folder and held up the plat map, my finger tracing the bold red line that marked my boundary. "This is my land. My name on the deed. Not the HOA's. Never has been." He didn't even lower his eyes to look. "You really want to lawyer up over a little mud," he chuckled. "Talk to Karen if you've got a problem." Karen Bellows, HOA president. Mid-50s frosted hair, always pulled into a severe not red blazer, her unofficial uniform. The kind of woman who could deliver a smile and a threat in the same breath. So I did. That afternoon, I drove to the Willow Ridge HOA office, a squat prefab building tucked behind manicured hedges near the neighborhood's grand entrance. Inside, it smelled of cheap air freshener and copier toner. Beige walls. Beige carpet, beige everything. Karen was at the counter when I walked in. She looked up, recognition flickering across her face before settling into a practiced mask of polite authority. "Mr. Corbin," she said, drawing my name out like it left a bad taste. "We've received your correspondence." Clarissa handled the reply, I believe. "She did," I answered, with no acknowledgement of wrongdoing and no commitment to stop. "The rigs are still coming. I'm here to say it again in person, for the record." I slid the folder across the laminate counter. She didn't touch it, just tapped one perfectly manicured nail on the cover. "You do understand your property abuts our utility easement," she began, voice syrupy. "Historically, that area has been used for—" "It's 10 feet outside the easement," I cut in. "My family has owned it outright since 1953. She tilted her head, the smile thinning. "Be that as it may, the space has served community needs for years without complaint. Most residents simply assumed it was shared." "Assumption isn't ownership," I said. Karen let out a short theatrical laugh and glanced toward Clarissa, who hovered behind a cubicle wall pretending to type. "Clarissa, are you hearing this? Mr. Corbin believes we've annexed his backyard." The words stung more than I cared to admit, not because they were clever, but because of the casual dismissal baked into them. As if my land, my history, my rights were nothing more than an inconvenience to her color-coded spreadsheet. "I'm not here to argue history," I said. "I'm putting you on formal notice. The next vehicle that crosses my boundary will find the access gated and locked. I'm within my rights to secure my property. If your equipment is on the wrong side when that happens, it stays until damages are settled." Her eyes narrowed, the smile vanishing. "You're threatening to impound our contractors' vehicles?" she asked, voice suddenly sharp. "No, ma'am. I'm promising to enforce my boundary. How your contractors choose to park is their decision." For the first time, she opened the folder, flipping through the pages with a single crimson nail. The photographs did the talking, deep gouges through the meadow rainbow slicks of spilled fluids, time-stamped images of rigs rolling in under cover of darkness. She closed the folder and pushed it back toward me. "If you insist on being difficult, Mr. Corbin, our legal counsel will be in touch. In the meantime, I'll ask the contractors to be mindful." The word hung in the air like a veiled warning. I met her gaze without flinching. "I'm sure your lawyers will enjoy the video evidence. I'll save them a copy." I turned and walked out the glass door, hissing shut behind me. The anger was still there, banked low, but something cooler had settled over it, resolve tempered and hard. That night, I worked in the shop until the stars came out. I unloaded the materials I'd quietly accumulated over the past weeks. Heavy steel posts, crossbars, a sturdy gate frame I'd welded myself from scrap I-beam. I laid them out under the floodlight, checking measurements twice, testing hinges, running a bead along the critical joints with my portable torch. The gate was simple, strong, and once installed, permanent. I added 2 more trail cameras to my arsenal, positioning them for overlapping fields of view, uncovering license plates at the entrance, another tucked high in the pecan grove, a third angled along the fence line from the west. All infrared, all silent, all feeding to a dedicated hard drive locked in my shop. Then I waited. They came in greater numbers than ever, 7 rigs by the end of the second week, hauling gravel, lumber, scaffolding, cement bags. The HOA had launched what their new park sign proudly called the Bellows Improvement Plan. My pasture had become their unofficial supply depots. I didn't confront them anymore. I stood on the porch each morning with my coffee and watched, letting them believe I'd finally backed down. But every hour, every unloaded pallet, every careless boot print was captured in high definition. One afternoon, the cameras caught Karen herself striding across my land in her red blazer, gesturing sharply at a contractor while standing well inside my fence line. She wasn't just permitting the trespass, she was directing it. That was the final straw. I composed one last message, short and unambiguous, sent by certified mail and email with delivery confirmation required. "This is your final notice. Any vehicle found on my property after receipt of this letter will be lawfully secured until full restitution for damages is made. This is private land. Trespassing ends now. 48 hours. More than fair." No reply came. So under cover of a moonless night, I backed my truck down the southern trail, swung the heavy gate into place, tested the hinges one last time, and waited for dawn. When the first rigs rolled in just after 6 engines rumbling like thunder on the horizon, I gave them time to settle. Then I eased the crossbar down, slid 2 heavy padlocks home, and ran a final welding bead across the hinge pins until the steel glowed and fused. No shouting, no drama. Just the quiet hiss of torch on metal and the soft click of something irreversible. I drove away without looking back, headed up toward Lake Hudson for a long day of fishing. By dusk, my phone showed 19 missed calls and a single furious text from Karen Bellows. "This is illegal. You will regret this." I smiled at the screen, then turned the phone off and cast my line into still water. For the first time in weeks, the only engines I heard were the quiet ones in my own chest, steady, patient, and finally at peace. The morning after I sealed the gate, the pasture lay unnaturally still. No rumbling engines, no shouted orders across the field, no careless doors slamming. Just the soft rustle of wind through the pecan leaves and the distant call of a mockingbird. I stepped onto the porch with my coffee and surveyed the scene. 7 heavy rigs sat marooned in the drying mud, their bulky silhouettes framed by the silver gleam of the welded gate. It didn't take long for the first protest to arrive. A sharp, insistent pounding echoed from the fence line, metal on metal, frantic and rhythmic. I walked down the path to find one of the younger contractors rattling the crossbar with both hands, his reflective vest, streaked with dried clay hard hat, pushed back on his head. "Sir, you've got to open this up," he called, voice cracking with urgency. "We've got deadlines. This is blocking emergency access or something." "Your emergency vehicles aren't trapped on my land," I replied evenly. "Your machinery is. Along with the scrap lumber, the fuel spills, and the trash your crew left behind." His radio crackled to life, Karen's unmistakable voice slicing through the static. "Tell him legal is coming." He repeated the message like a nervous messenger. I nodded once. "Bring them. I'll have fresh prints of the boundary stakes ready." By midday, the crowd had grown. 2 more contractors paced outside, the gate phones pressed to their ears. An HOA board member in a navy polo arrived next, sweating through his shirt despite the shade, and then, inevitably, Karen Bellows herself. She didn't walk down the muddy path. She stationed herself just beyond the gate, arms folded tightly, red blazer pristine against the chaos. Her phone was clutched like a grenade with the pin already pulled. "Mr. Corbin," she called, the syllables clipped and cold. "You've made your little statement. Now, let's not turn this into something uglier than it needs to be." I approached slowly, boots steady on the gravel. "No ugliness here. I simply fortified my property line. You're holding thousands of dollars in equipment hostage. Your equipment was parked without permission." Repeatedly. After multiple warnings. "I can have the sheriff here in 10 minutes. "Please do," I said. "I'd like him to see the gouges your rigs carved through my meadow, and the hydraulic fluid pooling near the creek." For the first time, her composure flickered, just a flash of uncertainty behind the polished mask. She drew a breath and shifted tactics. "What exactly do you want, Mr. Corbin? Money? A public apology? This kind of stunt won't play well when it reaches court." I looked straight into her carefully made-up face. "I want you to learn what no means." I said it clearly more than once. You chose not to hear it. Behind her, one contractor climbed onto a hood for better signal, waving his phone overhead. Another strung yellow caution tape between fence posts as if it could erase the damage already done. Karen lowered her voice, leaning closer to the bars. "We're in the middle of a major renovation. Investors are watching. You're jeopardizing community improvements." "Your improvements stop at my fence," I said. "They always have." She held my gaze a moment longer, then turned sharply and stalked back to her SUV. That afternoon, I forwarded the complete trail cam archives, every entry, every license plate, every timestamp, to 3 new recipients: the county zoning office, the local environmental compliance division, and Dean Warner, an old Army buddy who now worked as a municipal inspector. I attached a concise cover note detailing the pattern of unauthorized staging, the unpermitted gravel deliveries, and the visible runoff threatening the downstream creek. Dean replied within the hour. "Got it. This lines up with an easement complaint we flagged last quarter. Stand by. This just got bigger." The environmental office phoned the next day requesting permission for soil samples. I granted it immediately. Then came the call I'd been half expecting: Janelle O'Hara from Channel 7 News. Someone at the paper had passed along my evidence package. "We're doing a segment on HOA overreach," she explained. "Willow Ridge has popped up on our radar before. Your case has documentation most people only dream of. Would you be willing to speak on camera?" I paused on the porch, looking out over the trapped rigs glinting in the sun. I'd never sought spotlight. Quiet mornings, honest work, and the company of old trees had always been enough. But this wasn't just about me anymore. Set it up, I said. I'll talk. We filmed 2 days later in the pecan grove, the scarred earth speaking louder than any words behind me. I kept it plain, the timeline, the ignored warnings, the mounting destruction, the board's refusal to acknowledge boundaries. I'm not asking for special treatment, I told the lens. I'm asking for the same respect any landowner deserves. You don't get to claim someone else's ground just because you outnumber them or outshout them. The segment aired that evening. Phones started ringing off the hook, neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years, old friends from the service, even a local landscaping company offering free soil testing. Messages of support poured in. And then came the letter. Delivered by courier in a heavy cream envelope, Karen's personal stationery. Mr. Corbin, recent media coverage has unfortunately escalated a local matter beyond reasonable proportion. In the spirit of community harmony, the board invites you to a private discussion toward an amicable resolution before further legal steps are taken. Respectfully, Karen Bellows, President Willow Ridge, HOA. I read it once, folded it neatly, and set it aside. They weren't seeking harmony. They were scrambling for control. But control had already shifted. The city inspectors were preparing their report. The news cycle was turning. And the rigs still sat exactly where the contractors had left them, silent monuments to a boundary finally enforced. I walked the field that evening as the sun bled orange across the horizon. The ground was wounded, yes, but it was mine again. Quiet. Undisturbed. And for the first time in months, I slept straight through the night. The rigs stayed trapped for another full week, baking under the relentless Texas sun. Tires sank deeper into the softening earth as the mud dried and cracked around them like old pottery. A few workers returned on foot, hauling out personal tools and water coolers, but the heavy machinery remained silent, expensive anchors, holding the HOA's arrogance in place. Karen's threats grew louder and more frequent. Voicemails piled up, demands for immediate access, warnings of lawsuits, accusations that I was endangering public safety by blockading essential community operations. One message even claimed I had trapped personnel inside the fence, though every human had walked out the moment they realized the gate wasn't budging. I let the calls roll to voicemail. I had fishing to do. Lake Hudson was glass calm that week, the surface broken only by the occasional rise of bass chasing shad. I spent long afternoons in the John boat line in the water, mind unspooling months of tension. Out there, the only boundaries were the shoreline and the sky, and no one presumed to redraw them. When I finally returned home late Friday evening, the missed call count had climbed past 30. Among them was one from Deputy Tilson, an old friend from my Army days, who now wore the county sheriff's badge. Corbin, his message began, easy and familiar. Got some noise from the HOA folks saying you've locked up their equipment. Just so you know, from everything I've seen on paper, you're standing on solid ground, literally and legally. But give me a call when you're back in range. I'd like to hear it from you before this gets any sillier. I smiled, saved the message, and poured myself a glass of iced tea on the porch. The pasture looked almost peaceful in the twilight, the hulking silhouettes of the rigs softened by long shadows. Saturday morning brought a new development. A flatbed tow truck appeared on the road, followed by a black sedan with rental plates. Out stepped a man in a crisp gray suit, clearly the HOA's retained counsel, carrying a leather briefcase like a shield. Karen was already there, pacing outside the gate in heels that kept sinking into the shoulder gravel. They waited until I walked down with a fresh mug of coffee. Mr. Corbin, the lawyer, began, voice smooth and practiced. We are prepared to seek an emergency injunction if you do not immediately restore access. This constitutes unlawful detention of property and interference with contracted work. I took a slow sip. Your client's property was unlawfully placed on my land. I've simply secured my boundary. No injunction needed, just an apology and a settlement check. Karen's face flushed crimson. This is extortion. No, ma'am, I said calmly. This is consequence. The lawyer opened his mouth to continue, but the crunch of tires on gravel interrupted him. Deputy Tilson's cruiser pulled up, lights off, deliberate and unhurried. He stepped out, adjusted his hat, and nodded at me. Morning, Corbin. Morning, folks. Karen launched in immediately. Officer, this man has impounded $70,000 in equipment and is refusing access. Tilson listened patiently, then turned to me. Mind if we take a quick walk around the perimeter just to confirm boundaries for the report? Not at all. We strolled the fence line while Karen trailed behind, snapping photos of every scar and muttering about vandalism by immobilization. Tilson examined the welded gate. The clear survey stakes the trail cam housings discreetly tucked in the trees. Clean markers, he said quietly. No ambiguity here. When we returned to the group, he addressed Karen directly. Ma'am, I've reviewed the plat maps and the video Mr. Corbin provided. Your contractors have been trespassing, repeatedly. After written notice, Mr. Corbin is within his rights to fence and secure his own property. This is a civil dispute, not criminal. My advice: settle it with him, not through us. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Karen looked as though she'd been slapped. You're taking his side, she demanded. I'm taking the side of the deed recorded in 1953, Tilson replied. Karen stormed back to her car without another word, heels stabbing the gravel. The lawyer followed, muttering about further options. That afternoon, Dean Warner and a technician from the Environmental Division arrived in a white county truck. They spent hours walking grids across the pasture, taking core samples, photographing spills, measuring compaction. Dean paused at one particularly deep gouge filled with stagnant, rainbow-slick water. This is serious, he said. Runoff this close to the creek could trigger state-level fines. I nodded. Tell that to the board. I intend to. By evening, the tow truck had left without attempting a breach. The rigs remained rust, already beginning to freckle exposed metal where rain had splashed up. I stood at the gate as dusk settled, running my hand along the cool steel. The land around me was scarred and weary, but it was breathing freely again. No engines, no voices, no presumption. Karen might still have fight left in her, but the ground beneath her feet had shifted. And this time it wasn't mud, it was bedrock. The city's formal citation landed the following Monday like a thunderclap no one in Willow Ridge had seen coming. $11,800 in penalties, itemized neatly unauthorized staging on non-commercial land, unpermitted gravel stockpiling, potential stormwater contamination, and failure to secure temporary use permits. The notice included a 30-day remediation clause, clean up the mess, or face escalating daily fines. Karen never mentioned the citation in any of her increasingly frantic voicemails. Instead, the HOA law firm from Clearview sent a 20-page letter threatening countersuit for malicious interference, economic duress, and defamation via media dissemination. I read it once under the porch light, chuckled at the inflated language, and forwarded it to Francine Moore, the retired JAG attorney I'd hired the week before. Francine's reply came back in under 24 hours, concise, surgical, and devastating. She quoted statutes, attached our evidence binders, and ended with a single line that made me grin. Should your client elect to pursue this in court, discovery will be illuminating. We welcome it. I printed 2 copies. One went certified mail to the firm. The other I taped inside my shop window facing the pasture just in case anyone drove by for a look. 2 days later, Deputy Tilson called again. Heads up, Corbin. Karen's coming in this afternoon to file a formal complaint, everything from false imprisonment to vandalism. Claims your gate damaged one of the trucks while it was unlawfully detained. Vandalism by sitting still, I asked. That's her story, he said, amusement clear in his voice. We have to take the report, but it'll go exactly nowhere. Sure enough, just after lunch, a sheriff's cruiser rolled up the drive, followed by Karen's white SUV. Tilson stepped out first, followed by a younger deputy I didn't know. Karen marched ahead of them, like a general leading a very small army clipboard, clutched to her chest, lips so tight they'd gone pale. She pointed straight at me as I walked down from the porch. That's him. Officer, that's the man who trapped our equipment, endangered workers, and sabotaged a vital community project. Tilson raised a placating hand. Ma'am, let's all keep this civil. I am perfectly civil, she snapped. He detained over $70,000 in assets, refused all communication, and distributed doctored footage to the media to slander the board. The younger deputy glanced at me, eyebrows raised in silent question. Tilson turned to me. Mind if we walk the boundary one more time just to close the loop on the report? We set off along the fence, while Karen followed at a distance, heel-sinking phone camera recording everything. She stopped every few yards to photograph tire scars, muttering about evidence of retaliatory damage. At the deepest gouge, now crusted over with dried clay, she held up her phone triumphantly. See this contamination caused directly by the forced immobilization of our vehicles. Tilson studied the photo, then the actual ground, then her. With respect, ma'am, he said, this spill predates the gate. It's from your equipment. Mr. Corbin didn't pour it. "So you're refusing to arrest him?" "I'm stating facts," Tilson replied. "Your contractors trespassed after multiple documented warnings. Mr. Corbin secured his property legally. This remains a civil matter. You're welcome to pursue it in court." Karen looked ready to explode. She turned to the younger deputy. "I insist on charges." The deputy cleared his throat. "Ma'am, criminal charges require a crime. What we have here is a property dispute. You'll need to file in civil court." Her face went from red to purple. She spun on her heel and stormed back toward her vehicle, shouting over her shoulder, "This isn't finished." Tilson watched her go, then turned to me with a half smile. "She'll either drop it or dig herself deeper. My money's on deeper." I thanked him, shook both deputies' hands, and watched the cruiser pull away. That same afternoon, Dean Warner returned with the lab results. We stood in the middle of the pasture while he flipped through the report. "Diesel range organics above acceptable limits in 3 samples," he said. "Trace hydraulic fluid in 2 more. The creek's still clean for now, but this is enough for the state DEQ to open their own file if we push it." "Push it," I said without hesitation. He nodded, already in motion. Janelle O'Hara from Channel 7 aired a follow-up segment that night. The camera lingered on the empty scars where the rigs had sat, then cut to file footage of Karen's confrontation with the deputies recorded by a neighbor's phone and now circulating online. The anchor's voice was calm but pointed. The Willow Ridge HOA, already facing city fines, now contends with a $37,000 civil claim from homeowner James Corbin, who alleges months of unauthorized use of his land. Social media lit up. Someone clipped Karen's meltdown with dramatic music. #HOA Corbin trended locally for 2 straight days. I didn't feed the fire, I didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than any meme. A week later came the invitation I hadn't expected. An email from board member Richard Clemens, not Karen. "Mr. Corbin, the board invites you to address the membership during public comment at next Thursday's town hall meeting. We recognize the current situation has exceeded acceptable standards. Your perspective would assist us in determining appropriate next steps, including potential restitution. Respectfully, Richard Clemens." It could have been an ambush, but the tone felt different, tentative, almost contrite. I read it twice, then looked out over the pasture. The earth was still raw, but tiny green shoots had begun pushing through the compacted clay where rain had softened the surface. Life finding a way. I typed a simple reply. "I'll be there." The tide wasn't just turning, it was rising. And for the first time, the HOA was the one feeling the current. Thursday evening, the community recreation center was packed like I'd never seen it. Folding chairs filled every inch of the laminate floor, and latecomers lined the walls 2 deep. The air smelled of fresh coffee from the urn in the corner, and the faint tension of people who'd finally decided to show up for something that mattered. Karen sat ramrod straight at the long board table. On the dais, red blazer buttoned to the throat, hands folded so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Clarissa was to her left, eyes fixed on a laptop screen. Richard Clemens, tall, silver-haired, the one who'd sent the invitation, presided at the center microphone. He looked like a man carrying a weight he hadn't asked for. When the agenda reached public comment, Richard's gaze swept the room and settled on me. "Mr. James Corbin has requested time to speak." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Phones rose discreetly. I stood feeling the old hitch in my knee from a long-ago bad landing and walked to the podium. The room quieted until I could hear the hum of the overhead fluorescents. "I didn't come here tonight looking for applause or headlines," I began, voice steady. "I came because I was invited and because this has gone on long enough." I laid out the timeline, simply the first uninvited rig beneath my pecan tree. The ignored warnings, the deepening scars across land my family has held since before this neighborhood existed. I spoke of the nights I lay awake listening to engines idle on ground where my daughter once chased fireflies. I asked politely, I said. Then I asked firmly. Then I documented. Then I defended. All I ever wanted was for the word no to mean something. Heads nodded in the audience, slowly at first, then more openly. A few people I recognized only by sight met my eyes with something like gratitude. I turned toward the board table. This isn't about revenge. It's about accountability. Not just for me, but for every resident here who's ever felt steamrolled by a fine, a letter, or a decision made without their voice. When I sat down, the applause started small and scattered, then swelled into something solid and sustained. 3 more speakers followed. A retired teacher spoke of being cited for a bird feeder that was not in compliance with aesthetic standards. A young father described threats of liens over a backyard playset that extended 6 inches past an invisible line. Sharon Whitcomb, the widow who lived 2 streets over, stood with trembling hands and told how she'd removed every potted plant from her porch after a single violation notice left her afraid to challenge the board. Each story landed like a stone in still water ripples spreading wider. When public comment closed, Richard cleared his throat. "The board has deliberated extensively," he said. "We acknowledge a series of serious misjudgments in the handling of the renovation staging and in our communication with Mr. Corbin." Karen stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Richard continued. "Effective immediately, the board offers a formal and public apology to Mr. James Corbin for the unauthorized use of his private property for the damage caused and for our failure to address his concerns with the urgency and respect they deserved." A collective intake of breath. Cameras clicked. "We take full responsibility," he went on. "The association will settle Mr. Corbin's civil claim in its entirety. We have allocated funds from the discretionary budget to cover complete remediation, topsoil restoration, reseeding irrigation repair, and long-term monitoring. Furthermore, we are amending HOA policy to explicitly prohibit the use of any non-HOA land for association business, with violation punishable by immediate board sanction up to removal." Gasps rippled through the room. 2 board members shifted uncomfortably. One stared at his shoes. The applause this time was louder, edged with relief. Richard offered me the microphone again. I stood once more. "I accept the apology," I said, looking directly at Karen. For the first time that night, her eyes met mine, steady but stripped of their usual armor. Not because it erases what happened, but because it means something to everyone here. Who's ever felt small against a system that forgot it serves people, not the other way around? The room erupted. As the meeting adjourned, neighbors approached. Some I knew, most I didn't. Hands were shaken, shoulders clapped. A woman pressed a handwritten note into my palm, thanking me for giving her courage to fight her own fine. A teenager asked if he could help reseed in the spring. Karen lingered at the dais, gathering papers with deliberate slowness. When the crowd thinned, she walked over. "I didn't expect it to go this way," she said quietly. "Neither did I replied, "but it did." She studied me for a long moment. "We thought you were just the quiet man on the hill. Out of sight, out of mind." "That was the mistake," I said. "Quiet doesn't mean absent, and alone doesn't mean weak." She nodded once, small, almost imperceptible, then turned and left without another word. Outside, the night air was cool and clean. I stood under the parking lot lights and breathed it in. The weight I'd carried for months felt lighter, not gone, but shared now among many shoulders. The land would heal. So would the neighborhood. And for the first time in a long while, the future felt like something worth walking toward. Weeks after the town hall meeting, the pasture began to change in ways I could finally feel proud of. Sharon Whitcomb arrived first one Saturday morning, her old pickup rattling up the drive with her teenage grandson riding shotgun and a tray of bluegrass plugs in the bed. She climbed out, dusted her hands on her jeans, and said simply, "I brought starters. Figured you could use some help getting green back on this ground." I didn't argue. We knelt together in the biggest scar, pressing each plug into the softened soil while her grandson hauled buckets of compost from the truck. By noon, 2 more neighbors had shown up, Paul Martinez, with a load of mulch, and the landscaping crew from Channel 7, who'd watched the story and offered free soil aeration. No one asked to be paid. They just worked. We talked little and worked a lot. The sound of shovels biting earth, the soft thump of mulch bags hitting the ground, the occasional laugh when someone slipped in leftover mud. It felt like the land itself was listening and healing right along with us. By late afternoon, the worst gouges were filled and leveled. Tiny green spears already poked through where we'd pressed the plugs. I stood back, hands on hips, watching the sun drop behind the pecans and paint everything gold. For the first time since that first Tuesday morning, the field looked like it remembered what it used to be. Karen Bellows never ran for re-election. Word spread quietly that she'd sold her house over the summer and moved to a high-rise condo downtown somewhere with concrete balconies, no lawns, no fences, no neighbors to manage. I didn't celebrate when I heard. I didn't need to. People like her don't vanish because someone beats them. They vanish when the room stops listening to them. And the room had finally stopped. I kept the gate exactly where it stood. No longer welded shut, just padlocked with a simple chain. A quiet reminder that some lines once drawn clearly stay drawn. One crisp October evening, I walked the entire lower field alone. The new grass was thickening, the wildflower seeds we'd scattered in September already sprouting in bright patches of purple and gold. Bees droned low over the goldenrod. Somewhere in the distance, a child's laugh carried on the breeze, probably the Martinez kids flying kites again where the rigs once parked. I stopped beneath the big pecan tree, the same one that had sheltered the first offending flatbed. Its branches hung heavy with nuts. I reached up, picked one, cracked it between my palms, and ate the sweetmeat right there. The taste brought back my grandfather, sitting on this exact spot, showing me how to tell a good nut from a bad one. I smiled at the memory, then looked out over the meadow that had once looked like a war zone. It didn't anymore. It looked like home. That night, I sat on the porch with a thermos of coffee and watched the stars come out one by one. The trail cameras were still up, but I hadn't checked the footage in weeks. There was no need. The only things crossing my boundary line now were deer at dawn and neighbors who knocked first. I thought about everything that had happened, the ignored emails, the locked gate, the packed meeting, the apology spoken out loud in front of everyone. None of it had been easy, but every single step had been necessary. Because boundaries aren't just lines on a map. They're promises we make to ourselves and to the people who come after us. My grandfather kept his. My father kept his. And now I had kept mine. The wind moved through the pecans, carrying the faint scent of new grass, and turned earth. I raised my thermos in a silent toast to the land, to the people who helped heal it, and to the quiet strength it takes to say enough and mean it. Then I went inside, turned off the porch light, and slept better than I had in years. The fight was over. The field was whole again, and so was I. Spring arrived like a long overdue apology from the sky itself, gentle rains, warm sun, and a burst of green that seemed determined to erase every trace of the previous year's wounds. By April, the lower pasture had transformed beyond anything I could have managed alone. What started as a few neighbors with shovels and starters had grown into something closer to a community ritual. Families showed up on weekends with picnic blankets, kids running wild while parents raked and seeded. The Martinez children organized a wildflower brigade, scattering packets of black-eyed Susans and Indian paintbrush along the edges where the deepest scars had been. A local nursery, moved by the ongoing news coverage, donated truckloads of native pollinator plants, coneflowers, blazing stars, milkweed tall enough to hide a kneeling child. I watched from the porch most days, coffee in hand, letting them work. Occasionally, I'd walk down to lend a hand or answer questions about where the old fence line used to run. But mostly, I let the land speak for itself. It had waited patiently through the destruction. Now it drank in the care like it had been thirsty for years. The wildflower meadow took hold fastest along the southern edge, where the creek bent close to the fence. By May, the ground was carpeted in waves of blue and gold, humming with bees and butterflies, thick enough to cast moving shadows. Dragonflies skimmed the new grass like blue darts. On quiet evenings, the air carried the sweet, almost citrus scent of blooming milkweed strong enough to reach the porch. Children rediscovered the field. At first they came hesitantly, parents asking permission at the gate, but soon it became common to see kites soaring above the pecans again, or hear the delighted shrieks of tag games weaving through the tall flowers. One Saturday, a group of teenagers set up a volleyball net where the biggest gravel pile had once sat dumped. I pretended not to notice when they stayed past dusk. Sharon Whitcomb became a regular visitor. She'd arrive mid-morning with her grandson, a thermos of lemonade, and a new tray of perennials. We'd sit on an old log I'd dragged to the shade and talk about everything except the HOA gardening grandkids, the best way to keep deer from nibbling hostas. One afternoon, she looked out over the meadow and said quietly, "This is what community is supposed to feel like." I couldn't argue. Richard Clemens stopped by once alone without his board polo or clipboard. He stood at the gate a long time before walking down the path. When he reached me, he extended his hand. "I wanted to see it for myself," he said. "The healing." We walked the field together. He paused at the spot where Karen had once stood, gesturing at contractors now buried under a riot of purple cone flowers. I voted with her for years, he admitted, thought efficiency was the same as progress. Took watching the whole thing unravel to realize the difference. I nodded. Sometimes the ground has to get torn up before you notice what was growing there all along. He stayed another hour helping spread mulch around the new saplings the nursery had donated live oaks and redbuds to replace the stress the heavy rigs had put on the old pecans. When he left, he shook my hand again, firmer this time. The new policy held, he said. Not a single contractor has asked to stage off-site since the amendment passed. And attendance at meetings is triple what it used to be. I smiled. People pay attention when they realize their voice matters. Summer settled in hot and lazy. Fireflies returned in clouds, thick enough to light the meadow at night. I'd sit on the porch until the stars came out listening to cicadas and the occasional burst of laughter from neighborhood kids still chasing each other through the grass. The gate stayed padlocked, but the chain now hung loose enough for anyone to open with a polite knock. One evening in July, Deputy Tilson rolled up the drive in his personal truck fishing poles in the bed. We spent the twilight casting for bass in the creek bend, talking about everything and nothing. When the mosquitoes finally drove us back to the porch, he cracked open a cold drink and looked out over the glowing meadow. You did more than save your land, Corbin, he said. You reminded a whole neighborhood what it means to stand up. I shrugged. All I did was refuse to move. He laughed. Sometimes that's the hardest kind of standing. Autumn painted the wildflowers in rust and gold. The pecans dropped heavy crops more than I could shell alone. So I left bushel baskets at the gate with a sign, "Take what you need." They disappeared faster than I could refill them. By December, the meadow had gone to seed stalks, rattling dry in the wind. But even in dormancy, it felt alive. I walked it one frosty morning, boots crunching through the silver grass, and stopped beneath the big pecan that had started it all. Its branches were bare now, but strong. I rested my hand on the rough bark and felt the slow pulse of sap still moving deep inside. The land had forgiven faster than I expected. So had I. That night, a light snow dusted the hills, the rare kind that sticks just long enough to make everything look new. I stood on the porch watching flakes drift through the porch light, settling soft on the meadow like a quiet blessing. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughed, the sound carrying clear across the still air. I raised my coffee in another silent toast. To boundaries kept, to scars healed, to home finally fully mine again. Years have slipped by since that first Tuesday morning when the diesel scent cut through the grass. The meadow has matured into something wild and generous. Tall blue stems swaying shoulder high, in summer monarch butterflies drifting through milkweed clouds like slow orange snowflakes. The pecan trees have grown thicker, their branches knitting a deeper shade where neighborhood kids still string hammocks on lazy afternoons. I still walk the lower field most evenings, boots wearing the same faint path along the fence line. The gate remains steel posts, painted a soft green, now chain replaced with a simple latch that anyone can open with a knock or a wave. But no one crosses without asking anymore. Respect once forced has settled into habit. The HOA itself changed more than I expected. Richard Clemens served 2 terms as president, steering the board toward transparency budgets, posted online meetings, streamed fines requiring majority resident approval before issuance. Attendance stayed high. People had learned the cost of apathy. New families moving into Willow Ridge often hear the story not as gossip, but as quiet history. Ask Mr. Corbin about the Meadow parents tell their kids when they point to the wildflowers visible from the road. I never ran for the board. Someone asked once, half joking, and I laughed it off. My place is here on this side of the fence, tending what my grandfather started and what a community helped reclaim. Sharon Whitcomb passed 2 winters ago. We buried her on a hill overlooking a similar wildflower field she'd helped seed in the community park. Her grandson, now taller than me, still comes by every spring with a tray of new plants and stories about his grandmother's stubborn streak. She said you taught her how to stand her ground, he told me last April, pressing a shovel into the soil beside mine. I didn't correct him. Some lessons travel farther than we know. Deputy Tilson retired last year. We fished Lake Hudson one final time before he moved north to be near grandkids. Out on the water, he said, "You know, Corbin, most folks would have sold the land or lawyered up quietly. You turned a fight into something bigger." I shrugged, reeling in an empty line. The land didn't need a lawsuit. It needed witnesses. He nodded, understanding. These days, I spend more mornings on the porch than in the shop. The coffee still tastes the same strong, slightly burnt, but the view has softened. Deer graze the meadow edges at dawn. Red-tailed hawks circle overhead. And sometimes when the wind shifts just right, I catch the laughter of children weaving through the tall grass, where heavy rigs once scarred the earth. The scars themselves are gone. Not covered, truly gone. Soil turned and enriched, seeds scattered and nurtured, time doing what time does best. If you didn't know where to look, you'd never guess anything violent had happened here. But I know. And that knowing is its own kind of peace. One cool December evening, the kind where the sky turns a deep indigo, early, I stood at the gate watching the first stars appear. A young couple walked past on the road pushing a stroller, pausing to admire the meadow-lit silver by moonlight. "It's beautiful," the woman said softly. "Used to be a parking lot," I called from the shadows, unable to resist. They turned startled, then laughed when I stepped into the light. "True story," I added. "Long one, though." The man smiled. "We've got time." So I told them briefly the way you tell a fireside tale. The rigs, the gate, the standoff, the healing. When I finished, the woman looked out over the dark field, eyes shining. "Thank you for keeping it wild," she said. I tipped my hat, wasn't just me. They waved goodnight and continued down the road, the stroller wheels humming softly on asphalt. I lingered a moment longer, hand resting on the cool metal of the gate. The chain clinked gently in the breeze, a small familiar sound. Boundaries, I've learned, aren't always about keeping people out. Sometimes they're about letting the right ones in. The meadow rustled behind me, alive and unapologetic. I turned toward the house porch light glowing steady and walked the path home.